listeners to Mind Over Matter. I'm your host, Sana, and today we are diving into a topic that touches the heart and soul of the human experience: healing from trauma and the transformative power of therapy. Our guest today is Linda Knipe, author of the compelling memoir Braving Therapy: Rape, Buried Trauma, and the Triumphant Journey Over PTSD. And in this conversation, and in this book, Linda shares her courageous story of overcoming PTSD after a traumatic assault, navigating 5 years of therapy while pursuing a graduate degree in counselor education, and her insights from a 20-year career as a school counselor. Her book is not only a personal story, listeners, but also it's a compassionate guide for anyone facing similar struggles. Join us as we discuss the challenges of seeking therapy, the importance of trusting your therapist, and the resilience required to stick with the process even when it feels overwhelming. So, Linda, welcome to the show, and it's an absolute honor having you with us today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me, Sana. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Um, Linda, can you share a bit about your personal story and what was that inspiration? What inspired you to write Breathing Therapy?
Oh, well, I am my career in human services is behind me,
Mhm.
um, and I had always wanted to write. So I had been taking a um, writing kind of hackathon. It was a 5 day, an hour a day to get a book hammered out. And one of the things he said was, for your first book, write what you know about. And the therapy I went through was 20 years ago, but I had just been explaining it to a friend who was in a relationship where um, his significant other was pretty dysfunctional in the relationship. And he told me that she had had a rape in her past and had not received any help for that. And so I got talking to him about that. And so as I was taking this writing workshop, it was all in the front of my mind. And that's why I embarked on writing about this journey. And it's been a journey just writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Going
Thank you
back
so much. Uh-huh.
Yeah, going back when I was writing, it took me 2.5 years and just revisiting revisiting a lot of those times in my life, both the sexual assault itself, but then living all of those years of therapy, which were really difficult. It was a real
Mm.
journey.
It was, I mean, uh, you know, it it actually requires a lot of courage to revisit those memories and pen it down and bring it out to the entire world. So I hugely appreciate your courage and your vulnerability at the same time, and sharing your journey with all of us, Linda. And as we are talking about therapy today, and uh, starting therapy, it can be really daunting. It can be really difficult. So, what advice would you give to someone who is feeling that struggle to take that first step?
Oh, I there's a chapter. So let me first start by saying that when I started the book, I did not intend to talk about my story other than to say that I also had an experience of trauma. I
Mhm.
didn't want the book to be about me,
Okay.
and I didn't want to talk about rape or anything that might trigger someone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but people that were kind of beta readers and stuff kept saying, you need to tell your story. So it is my story, but the book is laid out in kind of topical chapters. And so there's a chapter on seeking therapy and all of the stuff you argue with yourself about when you're looking at the possibility of going to therapy. And every roadblock you try and put up for yourself, and kind of I talk through overcoming that roadblock. So I had all those conversations in my head. I also talked with my son who recommended that chapter because he had eventually gotten some therapy himself just for life issues. And it was all of the same stuff. He said, you really need to talk about what you argue with yourself about. And so all of those kind of obstacles that you talk about in your head are in there in that chapter. And I didn't really have a choice because I was in a counselor education program. The PTSD that was triggered in me in my first class was making me crazy. I wasn't able to function. So I really didn't have a choice. For one thing, I couldn't live like that. I wasn't able to eat. I was having a really difficult time sleeping. I was re-experiencing. I was dissociating. It was kind of like a windfall of strange symptoms that I was dealing with. And my professor explained what was happening and talked about therapy. He explained PTSD and if I was going to continue in the program, I really needed to get myself straightened out. So I didn't really have a choice about it. And I will say, because this has happened to people too. I had a bad experience with therapy right after it started. And so I was very reluctant to open myself up to another therapist. I had felt really judged the first time I went to therapy. And I really was worried about that. I was also worried because I had some skeletons in the closet that I had told myself I'm never going to talk about that stuff. And I was afraid a therapist might be able to dig it out. And I talk about all of that in the book. So,
Hannah, what made you push through? As you mentioned that you had a bad experience initially with therapy, and you were afraid to get out those skeletons out of the closet. What made you push through?
Well, with therapy and with seeking therapy, what I've always said to people is you'll know pretty quickly if you're not with the right therapist. And even though the problem with anything that is going on in your head, and I think the real power of I'm going to go back up for a second and explain a couple of things, if that's okay. One of the things that I've realized from all of the reviews that I've been getting with people that are connecting with different parts of the book is that everybody's got stuff that they hide, and it doesn't really matter. Life is hard, and you mull things over in your head that you never want to talk about. And so as people are connecting with different parts of my book, that's the theme, is we've all got stuff. Life is hard, and my trauma was bad, but other people have got hard stuff that happens to them and hard stuff that happens in their life. Everybody does. And so the kind of stuff that I was talking about, the stuff that was going on in my mind, because I think that was a lot of the power of the book, is I wrote about what I was thinking about because I had put it in journals. So when I went back to write, I had it all there in journals and wrote about what was going on in my head that I was not sharing. Um, and I also want to say the book itself, Braving Therapy, is
Mm-hmm.
the cover of the book is a half open doorway and it's just dark inside. And that's because the description of PTSD that always resonated with me and seems to resonate with other people is what happens is you know how in your house you have a junk closet or a junk
Yeah.
cupboard where you stuff things that you don't know what to do with when you're trying to clean up. You know, people are coming over to your house. You need to get things picked up right away. You pick up stuff. There are things you don't know where you should put them and you shove them in the closet and they stay there. And you keep doing that over the years. And before you know it, that junk closet is full and it's hard to get in there. You can't find what you're looking for. It's got to be cleaned out. That's what happens with PTSD in your mind. It's something that's so uncomfortable that's happened that you can't mull it over and think about it and think it through and store it as a regular memory. So you shove it in this closet in your mind and you just don't think about it anymore. So you don't process, you don't put a story the um, um, to what happened. You just shove the feelings in this junk closet in your head. And every time in life that something really uncomfortable happens that you don't know what to do with and it's too uncomfortable to think about, you shove it in there. And when
Mm-hmm.
PT happens, it's like something happens that the door pops open and stuff starts coming out of that junk closet in your head. And it's why it feels so crazy because stuff spills out that might not have anything to do with trauma. Like I would feel really strange sensations and stuff. It didn't feel like it had anything to do with the trauma, but that's what makes it feel so crazy. So when when I was looking at um, when I was looking at therapy, I had to take care of that. But with others, it's still stuff that is mulling around in their head and it starts feeling very chaotic. When you really feel like you need therapy, you got chaos going on in your head. And the thought of having to explain it to more than one person as you're trying to find the right therapist is very overwhelming. Like you don't want to talk about the stuff. I don't. When I'm depressed, I don't want to talk. And that's the one thing you need to do. But it's so chaotic in your head, you don't know where to start. And that's what I said in the book is when you find the right person, you're talking about the right stuff immediately. You don't have to go through you don't have to go through everything. You don't have to re-explain everything right away. You just know you can feel that you are talking about the right stuff. So as people are approaching therapy and worried about the chaos and trying to explain it all, you just know when you're talking to the right person, you're talking about the right immediately.
Mm.
Yep. And that was a long answer to your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it cannot be explained in just two, three lines. It has several layers to it. And I think talking about it, of course, it is much needed. And also, as you mentioned in the beginning, that, you have to first uh, identify whether uh, you are you have a good or a bad therapist. So another aspect is, trusting your therapist. So I believe trust is a huge part of therapy because you're letting all your you are uh, getting all the things out of you. So how did you learn to trust your therapist, and why is that trust so essential?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I wrote a whole chapter on trust because it was such a big part, and it was probably 6 weeks or a couple of months into therapy, and my therapist said to me, "If you don't start trusting me, we're not going to get anywhere." And I I was kind of taken aback, and I said, I trust you. And he just said, right. And then I left. And for the next week, I mulled that over. I wrote about it. I wrote him a letter. I didn't send it, but I was so mad that he had suggested first that I didn't trust him. And then, why should I trust him? Like, I didn't really know him. And I was just, I was angry about it. And because it started bringing up, like, I had through college and beyond been in like romantic relationships that I would put everything into, and then they didn't work out, and I would get dumped, and that would be hurt. That would hurt. And it kind of started feeling like that, like, oh, I should trust you, and then you're going to tell me we're done, and you're going to leave. And so I got really mad about that. And then I started looking up definitions in the dictionary because I did that throughout therapy. And I do that to this day about especially emotional words, to make sure I'm using the exact right word and that I absolutely understand it. And so I started looking up trust and then also faith and hope in the dictionary. And it was the International Dictionary at the time. It was a great big book. And they all were like, well, this doesn't speak to it. I shouldn't be trusting. And then I found the Boy Scout manual definition of trust. And it is, let me think. It is that people will live up to, like, honorable people will live up to your expectations, can even if they may fail sometimes, they will meet your expectations and your trust far more often. And what it said to me was that people try to be trustworthy people, try to live up to your trust. It's like they may fail in something. There might be something they do that fails you, but far more often, they're going to live up to the trust that you place in them. And I realized that that was where we were, that I had to trust him and that he would live up to it, even though it wasn't all or nothing, that I could count on him. And that's what I had to, that's what was comfortable for me. I could accept that. And then I started looking up faith and hope. And hope is, the belief that you can get better. And faith is that it will happen. And so I realized that those three things all together were what was going to help me through.
Very well defined faith and hope. To be honest, I did not know the particular definition, what exactly is faith and hope, but you very well defined it. And Linda, since we have a time constraint, so before we wrap up, your book is organized by topic, as you mentioned. It's topically organized for easy reference. So what do you hope readers will take away from chapters like seeking therapy or being brave?
I think the biggest, especially as I'm reading reviews, but the biggest thing that I hope readers take away is, I'm going to read one of the reviews. It was very, very short, but this reviewer said, "We all have an overstuffed closet in our head, things from our life we don't want to deal with or accept. This book shows us it's okay and needed to open the door and clean it out. Don't worry about what others will think. They too have a closet." And I think that's the power of my book. And I didn't realize that I was so intimidated about actually putting this book out there. I did finally talk about the things that I said I was never going to talk about. And I didn't want to, but I knew I had to in order to be authentic. And I was so intimidated about what people would say. And what I found out is nobody was talking about me. They were talking about themselves and how they connected and how they too have stuff they're afraid to talk about. And that's the stuff that's toxic. And that we need to understand that if we keep stuff in our own heads and we try and figure things out ourselves, and we try and work through our own emotions by ourselves, the only perspective we're getting is our own. We're not getting any other perspective. And to find somebody who is non-judgmental and can help us talk, and a lot of times the stuff you bury, you forget about, and it does the toxins just leak out and start making you feel sick. And it happens at different points to everybody when you go through a blue period or depressed or whatever. And being brave enough to talk is can be life-saving. I just listened to a TED Talk by Dr. Margaret Rutherford, and she was talking about perfectly hidden depression. And one of the things that she said, and I have talked about this before in my experiences, is people who are very successful, people who seem to have everything runs well in their life, and they've got, their life really well organized, and they still, like people such as Anthony Bourdain, who was a world-renowned chef, and there was a designer who suddenly within a month of each other committed suicide, and people just couldn't understand it. But Dr. Rutherford was talking about the epidemic of suicide and the fact that we all have pain that we keep inside of us because we're afraid people are going to judge us if we talk about our pain. And so we keep it inside of us until it gets to a point where you just don't feel like you can live with it. And I talk about that because I had those experiences through the years that I was in therapy, where I just didn't feel like I could live with the pain anymore. And when you get to a point where you're in so much psychological pain and there's an opportunity there to end it, that's not safe. So everybody has those moments. Excuse me. And one of the things that Dr. Rutherford said is now she tells her clients it is normal to have suicidal thoughts, to just think, I just wish I could stop living. But we have to be better about helping people talk, about being brave enough to talk ourselves. We have to live courageously and be willing to be vulnerable. And vulnerability takes courage.
True. Absolutely true. Wow, what a perfect conclusion, Linda. And if our listeners would want to connect with you and, get access to your book, Braving Therapy, how they can do that?
Okay. My book is Braving Therapy. That's the main title. The subtitle, Rape, Buried Trauma, and the Triumphant Journey Over PTSD. And I write under the name L. Feig, Feig, Knipe, Knipe. Also, my website is L. Feig Knipe, and I am on Facebook and Instagram under L. Feig Knipe. But the book is available on Amazon right now, and it can be ordered through a bookstore or your local library.
Lovely. We'll have the links in the show notes for our listeners to get your book, Linda, and connect with you. And Thank you so, so much, Linda, for sharing your story, your insights from your book, which reminds us of the power of vulnerability, persistence, and also seeking professional help in overcoming life's greatest challenges. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sana.
So, listeners, whether you are seeking therapy, supporting a loved one, or simply looking for inspiration, Linda's journey is a testament to the human spirit's ability to heal and thrive. So be sure to grab a copy of Braving Therapy and share this episode with someone who might need a dose of courage. Until next time, I'm your host Sana, and remember, every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. Thank you.